So far, we've looked carefully at the beginnings of Christian worship in the dining rooms of houses and at how church buildings developed after the legalization of Christianity in the Roman Empire by Constantine in 313. In the West, particularly in Rome, this development manifested itself in large basilica churches, and in the East, into the Greek cross form topped by an impressive dome. Today, we're going to be looking at slightly less spectacular buildings. What sort of churches did the earliest missionaries construct? Were they determined to recreate the great churches of Rome and Constantinople in miniature? Or would they use a more varied and vernacular style, using the materials and the local traditions of architecture that were available to them? We've already discovered how church buildings have influenced Christian doctrine and spirituality, and vice versa. When dining rooms weren't used for services anymore, the role of women in hospitality and in services diminished. When Constantine wanted to favour what became orthodoxy against the heretic Arians, he built important churches at the site of Jesus' birth and resurrection. Eastern churches, with their complex ground plans and their overarching domes, favoured a more transcendent or mystical experience of worship, rather than concentrating on the altar as the place of sacrificial atonement. We've already seen an attempt to standardise church architecture in the Roman Empire during the rule of the Emperor Justinian, who sent out flat-pack churches that can still be seen today in Ravenna, in Cyprus, and in Libya. Now, did this initiative work? Did the idea of a proper-looking church catch on? Let's start in the south, in modern-day Ethiopia. We perhaps remember the story of the Apostle Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch recorded in the book of Acts. But Christianity wasn't officially adopted as a state religion until the rule of King Ezana the Great of the Kingdom of Aksum in 330 AD. The problem with looking for the earliest churches anywhere is that they've often been overbuilt by later church construction projects, precisely because they're thought of as important holy sites. However, we can get some idea of what they might have looked like thanks to the archaeology of abandoned churches. Farah's Cathedral is a good example. It was built in the late 500s, and it was abandoned in the 1300s, after being in use for about 700 years. Old Dongola is a deserted town in what is now North Sudan. Its church of the granite columns was perhaps the cathedral of Old Dongola. It had 16 granite columns, each with elaborate capitals. And it seems that the town also had a cruciform church, built very much along the lines of the domed Greek churches that we've already seen. Now, Ethiopia is probably best known for its rock-hewn churches. Ethiopian legend suggests that these churches were started by a group of missionaries known as the Nine Saints, who arrived there in the 400s or 500s to establish monasteries in remote locations. Most of them are actually halls with 3 naves and a vestibule. They have high ceilings, they have pillars and domes. One of the most famous of these dates from a later period, around AD 1180. They centre around the town of Lalibela, and the most well-known is the Church of St. George. Other famous rock-hewn churches in Ethiopia include Beit Miriam, carved out of the rock in the 1100s. It's still in use today, and one of the churches recognised by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Ethiopia isn't the only country to have rock-hewn churches. Armenia was converted to Christianity very early, and the monastery at Gerhard was founded in the 4th century by Gregory the Illuminator, at the site of a sacred spring inside a cave. Turkey has famous rock-hewn churches in the Cappadocia region. They were begun in the 300s by small anchorite communities who wanted to live remotely and separately. Christianity also spread in the East. notably through missionaries of the Syrian Orthodox Church, sometimes called the Churches of the East or non-Chalcedonian churches. The remains of the churches in Syria itself are often very impressive basilicas, or in fact multi-domed cruciform churches. We've already seen the elaborate church of St. Simeon Stylites. There's also the 5th century church in a Druze village in northwestern Syria that is said to have inspired Notre Dame in Paris. It's considered to be the proto-church of the Romanesque style that we're going to look at next time. Now, I don't suppose that these impressive churches can be called missionary churches. They were situated at the heart of the birth of Christianity, close to the Mediterranean Sea, well within the influence of Rome and Constantinople at the height of their powers. But as it spread eastwards, the Syrian church founded churches in India and as far afield as China. Here are a few clues that we have about what those early church buildings looked like as they adopted the vernacular architecture of the eastern regions in which they were settled. St. Thomas's Church in Palayur is now a later Baroque building, but it's built on the site of a much earlier church that dates back to the first years of Christianity in India. Christianity might have arrived in India through the missionary work of the Apostle Thomas, and their distinctive cross is a good example of how church buildings took on the cultures into which they were moving, while they remained distinctively Christian. Here you can see that cross, characterized by those floral terminations and a lotus flower at the base, the 3 steps at the bottom symbolizing Golgotha, and the dove at the top of the cross symbolizing the descent of the Holy Spirit. Where the Roman Empire had spread in the west, Roman buildings were repurposed, and their building materials were often used to construct new church buildings. Saint-Pierre-aux-Nonains in Metz is a good example of this. You can see the Roman brickwork and the columns in the foreground of this picture. It was converted to a church in the 600s. Christianity arrived in England during the Roman occupation. In 1963, an extraordinary mosaic was discovered in Dorset, featuring a roundel of Christ with the Chi-Rho sign behind his head. It's perhaps the floor of a dining room in a Roman villa, a clue that maybe the early Christian celebration of Holy Communion in private houses had reached as far as England by the 300s. The official Roman Church's mission to England began in 597. St. Martin's Church in Canterbury was the first purpose-built church of that mission, and like churches from the same period in France, it also incorporates Roman brickwork. All Saints Brixworth dates from the early 700s, and it's built as a basilica, using materials brought from Roman Leicester and Toaster, almost 50 miles away. Unlike Faras in Sudan that we just looked at, it features an eagle motif in its decoration. Those strong interior arches are distinctively Roman, and they employ carefully arranged Roman stones. The church at Escombe in the north of England incorporates a stone from a Roman fort. It was placed in the wall upside down. It has a painted Anglo-Saxon chancel arch, and the Saxon altar cross still survives just behind the altar in situ. Very often, the remains of the earliest churches can be found in the crypts of cathedrals and parish churches that have since been built over in later times. The Ripon Cathedral crypt is still accessible, dates to the 600s. The mission church of the Venerable Bede, St. Paul's in Jarrow, may still have a Saxon crypt that is incorporated in the foundations. One of the most interesting features of the church is its stained glass, and Bede says that the bishop of that area sent to France to find glaziers to fill the windows of the new church in the 650s. They used coloured glass that was imported from Lebanon and Syria, and some recycled glass. Unfortunately, the original windows don't actually survive, but the fragments have been excavated and they've been put together in a new pattern. Bede says, "We have frequently said that blue signified the hope for heavenly goods, purple the endurance of this world's evils, scarlet the ardour of perfect love." So this Anglo-Saxon glass has been found in 16 other places in Britain. The Chapel of St. Peter on the Wall was built in the mid-1600s, and it's still in use today, and its barn-like interior is unchanged from its original form. St. Andrew's Church is said to be the oldest wooden church in the world still in use, and perhaps the oldest wooden building in Europe still used for its original purpose. Now, it wasn't just Roman stones that the early church builders used. The Ragnarok stone at St. Helen's Church in Skipwith in Yorkshire is thought to be carved by Norse raiders, depicting the Norse apocalypse, or the twilight of the gods. It's now built into the foundations of the tower of that church. The skill in carving stone was in short supply, and it's hard work, and perhaps that's one of the reasons that we find earlier Christian stones built into the fabric of later Christian churches. And a good example of this can be found at St. Gregory's Minster in Kirkdale, Yorkshire. The cross shafts and tomb decorations of the Minster's missionary monk founders are now holding up the church, perhaps a biblical reference to the apostles being the pillars and foundation stones. Either that, or it's an example of true Yorkshire frugality. There are many stone churches still in existence in Ireland, founded by the earliest missionary saints, like Patrick and Columcille. As the church continued to expand to the northeast and the northwest to Iceland, the local vernacular architecture was increasingly used by the missionaries to construct purpose-built churches. And I'm going to conclude with a picture of the Grafarkirkja, the oldest church in Iceland, where Christianity arrived in the late 800s. It has wooden walls and a beautiful turf roof.